I finally got my hands on Amazon CodeWhisperer and it's pretty mind-blowing. Now, if you don't know what Amazon CodeWhisperer is, I already made a video about it on this channel and I'll put a link to that in the description below. But fundamentally, it's an AI code suggestion tool. Now, these services are quite controversial. On the one hand, they can give you an incredible productivity boost as a developer, but on the other hand, you may see it as a risk to your job. Personally, I see them as both, but whichever side of the fence you sit on, one thing you can't do as a developer is to ignore these tools. So what is CodeWhisperer? Well, think of it as a code suggestion tool on steroids, very, very similar to Copilot from GitHub, which I already trialed in an earlier video, which is now available as a paid service at $10 a month. Amazon CodeWhisperer, on the other hand, is in preview, and there's a waitlist if you want to give it a try. So before we get into it, I'm Saeed, the Codogrammer, and if you want to be kept up to date with the latest tech, software, programming, and industry news, make sure you hit subscribe below. All right, so let's dive into CodeWhisperer and see how it behaves and see how it compares to GitHub Copilot. Okay, so the first thing is getting access to CodeWhisperer and setting it up in your IDE. Now, if you're watching this video far into the future when it's publicly released, then you can skip this part. Otherwise, it's currently closed preview, so you will need to sign up to the waitlist and then it's just a waiting game. Once you get access to it, you will get an email with an access token that looks a bit like this. And then you can follow the instructions on this page for how to set up for your IDE. I'm using IntelliJ and there is instructions for other IDEs also. Now, when setting up, you will need to accept their terms. Then you can pause and resume suggestions from the developer tools section of your IDE. So you can go to developer tools in the AWS toolkit window and you can pause auto suggestions or you can resume auto suggestions. All right, and once you set up, it opens this welcome to CodeWhisperer MD file. So just going to run through this briefly. Now, it mentions Java, Python, and JavaScript specifically, but uses the words includes, so other languages may or may not be supported, and we'll give it a try shortly. Suggestions are automatic, so you can just tab to complete, left or right arrow to select other suggestions. You can hit escape to get out of the suggestions that appear. To manually give it a kick, you can select option C on a Mac. And it mentions that if you want to get better recommendations, you want to provide more context to CodeWhisperer by putting more information into your class or code file, and include helpful comments and descriptive function or method names. And finally, because it is in preview, they do ask you to send feedback to the email address at the bottom of this file. All right, so let's get into it and see what kind of suggestions it can provide. So we've got a simple Java class here, and let's create some code to begin with. So let's say public static class. All right, and it's already given us one suggestion, so let's accept that with a tab. Formatting's a bit weird, but let's say okay. Yeah, pretty good. Let's create some functions. So public void. Okay, no suggestions. Let's try option C. Yeah, okay, good. So option C, give it a little kick and it produced a speak method. Let's see what else it can do. See, yeah. So this is a bit strange, right? Like if it's got suggestions, you'd expect them to pop up automatically, which it did for the name, age, and species fields. But for some reason, I'm having to select option C to give it a push, and it's not got any other options. It's just suggesting this code. So I can't do previous and next, but I'm going to select tab to accept that anyway. Let's just fix the formatting a little bit. Okay. Okay, and then it automatically suggesting sleep. So that's pretty good. So I think we can probably leave that there. I think that's okay for now. And let's use Lombox data just to save us a bit of boilerplate. And then let's create a main method. Oops, I didn't even actually have to type anything. I think it came automatically. Let's try that again. Yeah, that's good. And no, that's not particularly helpful. All right, so let's say monkey m equals nothing. Okay, new monkey get. All right, and then we can say m.printName. All right, and there isn't a print name method, so it's a bit of a strange suggestion. It knows what methods are available, but still it's giving us an odd suggestion that doesn't actually exist. So let's just kill that for a second. All right, so far what we've looked at, I would say that it's maybe slightly less fluent than Copilot, but the suggestions are pretty good and probably on a par with what Copilot would have suggested. The only thing is I had to give it a kick a few times to say option C, which is to prod it to produce suggestions. I don't understand why in those cases it didn't automatically provide suggestions, but let's continue. Let's try and create some methods that could be useful given this data class. So let's say public list monkey. Let's just import that. Okay, so yeah, that looks pretty good, but return null does not look pretty good. Let's see if we can get any suggestions out of this for an implementation. Okay, so again, I had to press Option C to get a suggestion. It didn't come up with anything automatically. Filter to age. Yeah. That actually looks like it would work. Yeah, pretty good. All right, so let's try another one. So let's say public list monkey. Get monkeys with names that, okay, right, not a bad suggestion. Again, probably using a bit of the context. So let's accept that. That's going to be a very similar implementation. And this time I didn't have to prompt it. It's just given that suggestion. So let's just click next and see what other suggestions it gives. Get monkey name versus get name. Yeah, so get monkey name doesn't actually exist. We've only got get name. So that's an erroneous suggestion. Let's just accept that. And you can see the error, right? So if we just kill that and say return. Yeah, so now it's not giving us the correct piece of code. It's only giving us the erroneous one. So let's just select that and then we'll have to correct it, right? So we can say get name. All right, that should pretty much do it. So let's try something else. Let's say public list monkey. Now, the interesting thing is that although the suggestion isn't what we want, it has associated fur with the monkey. So it's kind of almost makes it look like it understands that a monkey is an animal and this particular animal has fur. And that kind of association is not an association that you would get with general code completion. That's something specific to the learning that this has gone out and done. So in code bases where it's seen things like monkeys or whatever training data it's had, it's associated monkeys and fur together. So that's pretty good. Now let's try combine two lists of monkeys. All right. It's pretty good. And all right, so it's not done exactly what we wanted. What we wanted was a single list which contains all the elements that are in either list A or list B. But instead what it's done is it's giving us all the elements that are in list 1, but also contained in list 2. Okay, so it's not really what we wanted. Let's see if we can get a different suggestion. Yeah, it's given us a different suggestion, but its understanding of what we're trying to achieve is still wrong. All right, so there's an example of where it's failed, and it'd be interesting to try that example in Copilot just to see if a more descriptive method name would help. So let's try something else. Let's say public list monkey union of monkey lists. Okay, let's see what this looks like. Let's just minimize that. Okay, now this actually looks to me like not a union, but rather an intersection. So let's try, let's say intersection list monkey. Okay, let's see what that generates. Yeah, so if you look at that, it's actually generated the same code. So it's generated the same code for union as it has for intersection, yet they're different things. So that hasn't quite worked. So that's not a great suggestion from Amazon CodeWhisperer, but it's not that far off. It'd be interesting to see what Copilot generates for the same kind of use case. All right, so now let's try and create some methods to connect to AWS and to pull and read from different AWS services. Now, given that CodeWhisperer is provided by Amazon and it was trained on Amazon's code base, we would expect that any code that relates to AWS would be really on point and there'd be lots of good suggestions. So let's give it a try. Okay. So yeah, that's not a good suggestion because we've already commented that we're trying to connect to AWS. So let's say public void read from AWS Kinesis stream and print. Let's say stream name. All right, so not a good suggestion there so far. So maybe it needs some more comments. Connect to AWS and read from a Kinesis stream. Let's see if that helps. Okay. Connect to AWS. Read from a stream. Put into the console. Okay, so all it's done is generated comments. It hasn't actually given us any code unless I'm doing something wrong. But if the suggestions work the same way as all the other suggestions work, then it hasn't really done a very good job. So let's try something else. Public void read from DynamoDB and print. Okay, let's try that. Nothing. Okay, again, I think it's done something similar to what it had done previously, and it's used that context. Yeah, so that's not great. And it looks like this context was just picked up from here, and it's just done basically the same thing, but just adapted it to DynamoDB. So far, not doing very well with AWS. So let's try something else. Public void write file to AWS S3 bucket. Yeah, it's done exactly the same thing. So it gives us some useful parameters, bucket name, and file contents. So that part looks good. But the actual contents is just repeating, it's taking the context from what it's already done and it's adapting it. So the comments actually look good. Connect to AWS, write to the bucket, write to file, yeah, and kind of, and close the bucket. But it's done that in all these cases. It's just adapted the words. It's not given us any actual useful code. Maybe I need to import some libraries and then it might actually work. It might be a bit more sensible, but I would have liked it to suggest code as if I had those libraries in place and then I could import them in or bring them in using my IDE. But basically it hasn't done a very good job connecting to AWS. It supports Python as well. So maybe they've got more Python code over at Amazon. So we will give that a try and just see if the AWS based activities work any better in Python. So let me just grab a Python project. All right, so here we are inside a Python project. So let's see if we can create some Python connection code for AWS. Okay, we'll say, yeah, bucket name, file contents. Okay, so this is looking a bit better. This import should be at the top. Okay, but that's not a code generation issue. That's an import issue. So let's not worry about that now. So let's see, resource to S3, bucket puts. Yeah, this looks good. I'm not a Python developer, but this definitely looks a bit more promising. So let's create another function to AWS, Kinesis, and read from stream. Yeah, so it takes a stream name. It's got the Kinesis object. So it takes a stream name, creates a client, and starts to read records and returns those values. Okay, that's good again. So we don't necessarily need to go into more detail than that, but immediately you can see that it's got much more capability to produce suggestions for connecting to AWS services when you're using Python. And I assume that's because AWS must be sitting on a lot of internal Python code rather than lots of internal Java code. Now, the strange thing is that when they talk about the training for their AI models, it was trained on publicly available source code, and lots of that code must be interacting with AWS services. So I'm surprised that that wouldn't consist of large amounts of Java code. Java is one of the most popular languages in the world. So I'm surprised that there weren't lots of good suggestions on the Java side for AWS connectivity, but maybe there's just better suggestions for Python. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to try was to see if AWS CodeWhisperer works in any languages that are not actually listed in their marketing blurb. So one of the languages that's not listed in their marketing is Kotlin. So I've got a Kotlin project open here. So let's try and create some Kotlin code and see what happens. So we'll just create a Kotlin script. All right, so no suggestions so far. Let's try something else. Yeah, again, no suggestions so far. What can we do? Okay, let's try something else. Let's try fun. Add two numbers together. Okay, literally no suggestions are coming up for CodeWhisperer. Let's just try adding some comments. A function to connect to AWS S3 and read from a bucket. Yeah, nothing. Let's say function to add two numbers together. Let's just double check that the AWS toolkit is actually running. Yeah, auto suggestions are up and running. So this time we'll try and prompt it to generate something. So if we say option C, all right, we could have just done that at the beginning and seen that it doesn't actually work for Kotlin. So although the documentation says it includes support for particular languages, you can try other languages, but for me, I just tried it with Kotlin and it doesn't work. Let me know if you find that it works with some other languages as well. All right, so before we do a direct comparison with Copilot to see what kind of suggestions it produces for similar methods, let's just do a quick check for one of the features of Amazon CodeWhisperer, which is the security check feature. So let's put some code in here, which looks a bit dodgy. So let's say string username equals, just say A, and say public string password. Now, obviously you wouldn't do this in real life, but we want to put some code that looks dodgy from a security perspective. So we say public string, say SSH key, say SSH private key. Okay. All right. So that's not very secure. So let's just open up the AWS developer toolkit and say run security scan. Let's see what it comes up with. All right, so that's completed. So let's just have a look and see what it says. Allocated resources are not closed down properly. So let's just see which line that's talking about. All right, so it's talking about, I don't even remember putting that in. All right, so that's a bit strange. It didn't find any problem with this code here, but it found some problems in unrelated classes, which just exist in this project. Okay, so we don't need to worry about those for now. Let's try and pass those values into a method. Let's say connect to AWS, and let's say string username, string password, string SSH private key. Yeah, you wouldn't normally have that, but just for the sake of it. All right, and then let's print all of those values out. All right, so let's try running that security scan again, see if it comes up with anything different this time. All right, again, the only security issues it found were these resource leaks here. So let's just look at project errors. Okay, that's fair enough. That's because data is not imported. So let's just ignore that for a second. So let's go to current file. All right, so that's a bit strange. The security scan from CodeWhisperer didn't find anything wrong with me printing out usernames, passwords, and SSH private keys. I suspect it's still in its infancy and still going to be doing a lot more learning, and then maybe it'll improve. Or maybe it just doesn't consider this because it knows that these values are dummy values and therefore it's not a security risk. I don't know. But that's the security scan feature, which if it does actually find something in your project, it could be quite useful. Okay, so in order to do a comparison, now let's have a look at Copilot and we'll check for some of the things that didn't go so well and see if Copilot can generate better suggestions for us. So the first thing we're going to do is pause auto suggestions from CodeWhisperer, which we've done. And then let's go to IntelliJ preferences. Let's go to Copilot and automatically show completions, ID completions side by side. Okay, so we can say apply. All right, so now let's go back to this method here. Let's delete that. And okay, that wasn't much more helpful. Let's put that back. Let's go here. Okay, these suggestions are much better. So let's open GitHub Copilot. So let me just delete this and open GitHub Copilot and see if it can make some suggestions. Okay, so Copilot is doing a very similar thing. In this case, it's just suggesting comments, which aren't very helpful. So in that regard, it's no better than AWS. All right, so let's try the union method that we had trouble with earlier. So let's copy that line and then we'll comment this out. And again, it's generated the same thing. And I think that's because it can read this code here. So let's get rid of that. And let's see if this generates anything better. Okay, it's a bit different. This time it's saying stream filter. All right, this again, I'd have to go through it, but again, it's got a negation in there, which is different, but it doesn't look like a union to me. It looks like it's finding everything that's in the first collection that is not in the second collection, probably. Okay, so that's not massively helpful either. So let's delete that to get it out of the way, and let's see how it works with intersections. So I'm just going to copy that, then just delete this altogether. All right, and the suggestions here are, yeah, that looks like a good intersection. Could probably be simpler, but yeah, not that dissimilar, but this time without the negation. Okay, so let's try our Kotlin project to see how that looks with CodeWhisperer. All right, so here we are in our Kotlin project. So let's just minimize a few of these things and let's make sure this is still disabled. Yeah. All right, so now we've got Copilot running. So let's see if this can come up with any suggestions. Yeah, okay, immediately Copilot is suggesting for Kotlin code, whereas AWS CodeWhisperer just came up with a flat error saying, sorry, we can't help you. Let's try something else. Let's say def connect to AWS S3. Oops, that was already good. Yeah. So it doesn't look like it has got any of the actual connection code in there, but it's done quite a lot more than AWS CodeWhisperer is doing, which is nothing because it doesn't work for Kotlin. All right, so hopefully that gave you an idea of what Amazon CodeWhisperer is capable of doing, at least at this time while it's in preview. And you got an idea of how it differs with Copilot. Now you can see that a lot of the code that was generated from the collection manipulation methods was not that dissimilar from CodeWhisperer to Copilot. And you can see that the suggestions were a bit flaky in the case of Copilot and CodeWhisperer, but both of them kind of generated quite a bit of code, which would give you a starting point to play with and tweak. So it's maybe not perfect, but it does produce quite a lot of code, which you can then manipulate to get the result that you want. Another interesting takeaway I thought was that I was expecting CodeWhisperer to be really amazing at connecting to AWS services and providing all the boilerplate for that kind of thing, because it was trained on so much of Amazon's own code. However, at least for Java, that wasn't really the case, but we saw that in Python, those suggestions were a lot better. Now, whilst I've been playing around with Copilot, I felt that it's really much more surprising. It's able to produce much more wide scoped suggestions. So strange domains, unusual things, you put it in there and it seems to have come across code that relates to those kinds of domains. Also, it was able to quite easily suggest Kotlin code because I think it's going out there, learning from different code bases, and it kind of doesn't really discriminate too much between one type of code base or another. It's just all information for it to consume, because I think GitHub will contain so much varied code from so many different languages, and it's out there and able to learn from all of that code. So hopefully that was useful and you got to see how CodeWhisperer currently works. I'm sure it's going to improve because it's in preview and they're probably training it on more and more data, and it will just keep adapting and improving. And plus all the users that are using it, they'll collect feedback and telemetry data from them and be able to further tweak the product. Let me know in the comments below whether this is a product that you're actually looking forward to using, or you prefer Copilot, or you have any major concerns about these products and would prefer not to use them at all. And if you want to be kept up to date with the latest tech news, developer news, programming news, that kind of thing, and tech tutorials, then make sure you hit subscribe, and thank you for watching.